This week we're reading the portion of Chukas. This is the week of the ultimate statute, something that's not understandable. Even Shlomo Melech, the wise man who ever lived, who understood all statutes, but the statute of the red heifer he didn't understand. And the Ramchal in this chapter, he quotes that verse in Koheles, where he says, Amarti achakmo v'rechokim mimeni. He says, although I'm so wise, but this is beyond me. And this is referring to the statute of Poraduma, of the red heifer. It's beyond him. Over here, the Ramchal is, use this verse that what Shlomo was saying, that in terms of how you coalesce all the systems and how everything is interconnected, as we'll discuss more specifically, which we touched upon, even that is beyond his understanding, meaning there's certain attributes, and based on man's behavior, there's the attribute of justice, there's attribute of mercy, there's chesed, there's everything. And everything interplays, and you have to see how this evolves till the end of time. It's not only what's good for now, what's good in the ultimate. For instance, the Ramchal says in one location, the concept of Rosha V'Tovlo. Why is Rosha V'Tovlo? That even a person's evil, Hashem treats him well. Why? Because in the future, maybe generations later, if God would destroy him now, that descendant who's meant to be born from him, generations later, has not come to existence. So he cuddles and he takes care of that Russian now to ensure something good, that good is going to take place in the future. For instance, we find, it says in the Midrash, that God is able to extract light from darkness. And how do you extract light from darkness? And what is an example of light from darkness? Avromi Terach. Terach was an evil man. He was an idol manufacturer. When his son smashed the idols, he informed on him to the Nimrod, the king, that he should be killed. And if the miracle wouldn't have taken place, Avram would have died in the kiln. Why did Avram survive? First of all, a man like Avram, who gave meaning and value to existence, because he recognized God despite everything, he survived. If Hashem would have taken out Terach, the father of Avram, earlier, there would have never been an Avram. It was Rosha V'Tovlo, but why? So there it was immediately understandable, because soon, during his lifetime, we see who was born to him. Who was born to him? Avram. But what about its generations later? Do we understand how things evolve and why things happen the way they happen? Who knows? Only God knows. So we see that all these calculations and these issues and the prerequisites and the ultimate purpose, we all understand the ultimate purpose, as we discussed it many times. The ultimate purpose in existence is that we should achieve a level of completion, perfection. The question is, how do you arrive there? And what is perfection? And what's sufficient? What is the minimum and what's the maximum? What is it? How long is it going to take? All these different issues, there's so many variables which will determine all these issues, what to release, what energies to release. When does God withdraw? When doesn't he withdraw? All this, unless God tells you what it is, and even if he tells you, it's beyond the person's capacity to understand all these things. So he cites the pasuk, this verse in Koheles, regarding all that we're discussing right now, how to compute all this and what determines that computation. It's Amarti Achakma V'Rechokim Mimeni. As wise as I am, it's beyond me. That even Shlomo Melech, with his wisdom, bordered almost on the infinite, because he was endowed with that. This was beyond his capacity. He said the same thing in regard to that red heifer. The understanding of the red heifer, as it says, it contaminates the pure and purifies the contaminated, the most extreme level of contamination. He says, this is the ultimate statute. It's a contradiction in itself. Rechokim mimeni, it's beyond me. So it's very interesting, and it all comes together with this. we discussed, the Medrash says explicitly, what was the blueprint for creation? Right before you build a structure, you have a blueprint, and you build based on the blueprint. God looked in the Torah and he created the world. The blueprint for existence is the Torah. What does that mean? It means, let's say a person hires an architect to design whatever he needs. Besides the actual design, the person has to say, what exactly are your needs? How many bedrooms do you need? Do you need a meeting room, an office? Whatever is needed to accommodate that resident, the architect includes in his plan. Whatever amenities he needs, whether comforts he needs, whatever, it's all included in that plan. What is the plan of existence? What's its value? Its value is to accommodate the Torah. That every aspect of the Torah has to be implemented, and every challenge, because man's existence only has value because there's always choice, there's always a challenge. And if he succeeds in the challenge, so the setting for that challenge has to be put in place. How many nuances, how many levels are there in Torah that have to be accommodated within physical existence? First of all, we have endless human beings over history. There's no human being who's exactly the same. Every soul is a different soul. Every soul needs a different degree of perfection. Every soul has a different mission. Different nuances. For every nuance, although they may be the slightest, but that has to be accommodated. So what has to exist in existence to be able to accommodate and achieve the objective of creation, which is addressing every aspect of Torah, every challenge from the beginning of time till the end of time? What's needed in that blueprint? What's needed? And what does the world contain? It's not fathomable. Not fathomable. Impossible to only God knows. God, the creator, who the Torah is his wisdom, and he understands exactly what has to be achieved. And what's what we call perfection, what's called shleimus, only he could, because he understands the need and he understands the blueprint, he understands exactly what has to be created to accommodate that blueprint, which is the Torah itself. So you're getting an inkling. Person has 1,000 employees. It's a lot of employees. Each one has another function. Each one has a different responsibility. Could you imagine you have to work it all out of paper, pen and paper, put it in a computer? Easy. What about if you have 10,000 employees? What about if you have 1 million employees? What happens if you have 8 billion employees at one time? And all their needs, every conceivable need has to be accommodated. Their function, their brain activity, their creativity, when they succeed, when they fail, how they should be dealt with, who gets a bonus, who gets docked, illnesses, everything under the sun, all that, and that's present. What about the previous generation? What about from day to day? You always have to continuously tweak the system because the system has to meet the criteria of what the Torah is all about. And at times, God has to override the system. This is achakma rechokim mimeni. Amarti achakma. I said, as wise as I am, as smart as I am, as brilliant as I am, there's no word to describe Shlomo Melech's wisdom. Rechokim mimeni, it's beyond me. The parah aduma, the red heifer, is exactly the same. So you can ask a question: is it really comparable? As we just described, not understandable, and what it takes, the capacity to understand existence. You tell me you put that on the same level as the parah aduma. Parah aduma seems to be not as complicated. The calculation, the computations of existence continuously, it's something beyond any capacity. But yet, he says the same words in regard to existence, he refers it to the parah aduma. Now, why is the red heifer the most difficult statute? And even King Solomon was not able to fathom or comprehend what it was, but every other he was able to comprehend through the endowment of chokhmah, of wisdom, which Hashem endowed him with. Why? So if you remember, we've mentioned Orach Chaim HaKadosh. When the Torah introduces the concept of the parah aduma, it says, Zos chukas haTorah. is the statute of the Torah. Now, what is the statute? How to purify a person who becomes contaminated with the dead. So yes, a very basic question. If you want to be more definitive, it should say, this is the statute of purification. Not this is the statute of the Torah. Be more specific, or use another term. This is the statute of contamination. So here we're identifying exactly what its value is. What do we speak about? This is the statute of the Torah. So he goes to explain that when was the Jew subject to contamination? That was only post-Sinai, Sinai going forward. Pre-Sinai, the Jew was not subject to contamination. We could not contract contamination. For instance, before we left Egypt, we brought a Paschal lamb. And Torah speaks specifically what is needed. You have to bring the goat or the sheep, cannot be blemished, it has to be the families, they have to eat it together. There's no mention that if a person's contaminated, he has to purify himself. Why is that mentioned? The answer is because since pre-Sinai, the classification of the Jew was Noahites. We were not Jews. A Noahite doesn't contract contamination. Just as an animal doesn't contract contamination, a Noahide doesn't contract contamination. We pre-Sinai were Noahites. Therefore, the laws of contamination had no relevance to us. What happened when we came to Sinai? We assumed we went into another realm of existence, of value. It's called Odom. We then assumed what Adam was pre-sin, before he ate of the tree of knowledge. At that point, contamination has relevance to us. Why? What's the reason? So he goes to explain that what is the source of all contamination? Impurity. Contamination is spiritual impurity. I'm not talking about physical uncleanliness. Spiritual impurity. What is the basis for spiritual impurity? Spiritual impurity means God created forces. We have positive forces, we have negative forces in existence. They're called nether forces. These nether forces, that is the counterbalance to good in existence, because you have to have a balance. Now, everything that exists has to have a source for it to exist. What's the source of all existence? God. It's something that represents the holiness of God. There's no soul in existence which is equivalent of the Jewish soul. The non-Jewish soul and the Jewish soul is a different soul. The word mega is not enough to describe the difference between the Jewish soul and the non-Jewish soul. It's a different realm of existence. Even the greatest angel cannot fathom the makeup of the Jewish soul. That is the dimension of the soul itself. When we speak about man was created in the image of God, our neshama, our soul, the Jewish soul reflects the image of God. It has a certain degree of innate holiness, which reflects God's holiness, the aspect of being infinite. The angel cannot fathom it. A non-Jewish soul is not that. The nether forces need sustenance. Therefore, they attach themselves to the ultimate source of life, which is the Jew, which could see the body is the receptacle, is the repository, is the domicile for that neshama, for that soul. That's what only after Sinai did we achieve that level, that dimension of holiness because of our neshama, our souls. Therefore, we contract contamination for that reason. Therefore, the corpse of a Jew contaminates beyond the level that a corpse of a non-Jew. A non-Jew corpse contaminates because it's a receptacle for the soul. But it doesn't contaminate if you're under the same roof. You have to come direct contact. A Jew, even if you walk into the room where the remains of the Jew is, you become contaminated. It's a different dimension. So what caused us the metamorphosis that took place at Sinai? That we went from a Noahide soul to this new dimension of soul, which is called the Jewish soul, which even the angels cannot fathom. What precipitated that and what activated that system to reach this new dimension? It was the Torah. So every aspect of advancement within the Jewish soul is directly connected to the Torah itself. There's that direct linkage. The Torah itself is the wisdom of God. The wisdom of God is unfathomable because as God is infinite, his wisdom is infinite. So it comes out if the basis for the Jewish soul to assume this metamorphosis, this new dimension of reality is due to the Torah. So if that's the case, you have to understand the cause of that. But the cause, which is the Torah itself, is unfathomable because that's infinite. As a result of that, you cannot fathom the understanding how this mechanism works. It contaminates the pure and purifies the contaminated. Because this process is directly connected to the spiritual makeup of the Jewish soul, which is directly the understanding of the Torah's entirety. Therefore, Shlomo says it's unfathomable. Unfathomable. Amarti achakma, as wise as I am, rechokim mimeni. It's beyond me. So now it's very good. The systems that were employed to compute and to decide and determine every moment what God should release, it's based on the present, the past, and the future. And the numbers of souls, what has to be achieved. But what's the blueprint for existence? The Torah. What has to be achieved is directly related to the Torah. The Torah, it's an entirety. The Torah's entirety is unfathomable. Therefore, the Ramchal writes, Shlomo says, what he says is wise as I am, it's beyond me. He's going on all the systems of how existence functions on an ongoing basis. It's beyond him, because that's all directly connected to the blueprint, which is the Torah, and the world, all aspects of the world have to address that. And to address that, the systems have to be on an alert, continuous changing, and it's all coalesced, and everything is a result of something else. It's not fathomable. So the same reason why the paraduma, the red heifer, is unfathomable, it's the ultimate statute, because it's chukas haTorah. Identically, existence is chukas haTorah. Existence only exists because of the Torah, because the Torah is its blueprint. As a result of that, it's rechokim mimeni. It's something beyond me. This is the linkage, and this is the commonality between the paraduma, the red heifer, which is the ultimate statute, and the ongoing function and God's intervention and interaction and willing of every moment of existence. That's how I understand it. We say the Amida, what we call the Shemona Esrei, the 18 blessings. The text of the 18 blessings, who is the author? Who authored the text of this? So the Gemara tells us, Talmud tells us, the men of the High Assembly authored the Amida, and then the Gemara tells us, the Talmud tells us, the common Nevi'im hoyu beineim. And among this body of 250 great Torah scholars, there were a number of prophets among them. Now the question is, what do we need prophets? Say they were the most advanced level of Torah sages after the destruction of the first temple. This is the beginning of the second temple period. The Rambam in the Laws of Tefillah writes something interesting. He writes that initially, Rambam's position is one has an obligation to pray once a day within a 24-hour period. It's a Torah obligation to pray to God. And there's a certain format. The format is similar to the way we have it. The opening blessings, we speak about God. Then we have the requests, the supplications. Then it closes with the thanks. We thank God. That's the closing. But the actual terminology and the subject matter, it was up to each person. Each person chose his own words and prayed that we chose to pray. So why, after we returned, after 7 years in Babylon, why did the men of the High Assembly author the Amida? That's the question Rav Chaim Voloshin deals with. The Rambam. So Rambam says, before we went to exile, the Jews spoke a pure Hebrew. There was no other language we spoke until we went to Babylon. To Bavel, the Hebrew became a jargon. It was no longer pure. Why? There was Babylonian, there was Persian, It was intermingled with other languages. As a result of that, Hebrew is God's language. So who are the experts in the purest Hebrew? These were this body of people. So since the individual Jew, at one time who spoke a perfect, pure Hebrew, he communicated with God using his own words. Because the words he used were Hebrew words. That's God's language. When he came back, that language wasn't as pure as it was. So to be able to have an appropriate expression, they couldn't leave it up to the people themselves. So they created a uniform text, which is called the Amida. And it's in the purest Hebrew. That's the Rambam. That's why the men of the High Assembly authored the Amida and didn't leave it to the individual person as it was pre-destruction of the first temple. Those are the words of Rambam, Maimonides. However, Chaim Volozhiner adds to it. He says, but what do we need prophets? You could be a linguist and you know pure Hebrew without having prophets. Why did we need prophets among them? So he goes to explain that the words that were chosen, it's not only the Hebrew, the words that were chosen in the Amida, every request we make, every supplication we make, included in those words and the order of the words, address every conceivable need of the Jewish people from that time till the end of time. And because they were prophets, they understood what's coming down the pike, all the needs of the Jewish people. And whenever there's a problem, what is the cause of the problem? If you understand all the inner workings of the spiritual counterpart to this existence, you know exactly what has to be addressed. So they used words. When you say those words, it activates forces. And when you activate those forces, it brings about positive results or wards off something which is negative. So therefore, you need, besides mention of Torah sages that they were, you also needed prophets who God directly communicated with them, to have this insight, to understand the inner workings of existence. So the words he said, Chaim Volozhiner writes, when we say a word, what do we understand? Slach, forgive. Or other words that are used. At the most superficial level, we understand what it means. But the ramifications of that word, what it activates, the forces that are released because we say it, as long as we have an appropriate mindset, we have no understanding what that is. Everything is innate, contained in the word. The word itself, when you say that word, it activates it. I gave the example. You have Trident missiles under the ocean. The ones who are going to set off those Trident missiles, they have a keyboard, and when you hit that key, the missile is launched. If a person doesn't know that key is somehow connected to that system which activates and launches the Trident missiles, you're pressing a key. Identically, even more so, when we say those words with the proper understanding that we're speaking to God, you need that minimally, that you're an audience. When you say that word, it activates a positive force, and that positive force activates another force. And understanding all the coalescing of all the different forces which are needed to bring about the end result, only the prophet understood this. We have no understanding. You just say the word itself activates it. You say 18 blessings, and you say they added a 19th blessing. All this, and each one complements the other. When you say that in conjunction, that addresses every conceivable need from then till the end of existence. That's the value of the Amida. So even Rambam, who says you only have to pray once a day on the Torah level, rabbinically they said you have to pray 3 times a day, in the evening, the morning, and the afternoon. So what are you doing? These words, which have this innate ability to activate these unlimited forces, you're not only repeating it once, saying it once, say 3 times. You know what the value of that is? The person would say, it's enough. 1 time a day is not enough to pray. If you would only understand what's contained in those words, each word, it's like you have the elef abdol, you go to a slot machine and you pull the lever. You pull it once, $5 million come out of the lever. You pull a second time, another 5 million. A third time, $50 million come out. You're not going to stop pulling that lever, because every time you pull the lever, it activates, and all of a sudden you have all this wealth coming out of that machine. Lahavdil, every time we say that word, every time we repeat the Amida with the proper understanding that we're having an audience with God, and based on your level of humility and reverence, that determines the force of that pressing of that button, saying that word. If it's said with a certain mindset and you're a certain dimension of person, the moment you say it, it activates that. So could you imagine? A person feels saying the Amida is a burden. It's a burden. The Gemara tells us we have 18 blessings in the Amida. Where did they come up with 18? So one opinion in Talmud is there's one psalm, we say it, Mizmor LeDavid. In Mizmor LeDavid, in that psalm, which we say on Shabbos when you return the Sefer Torah to the Oro, to the Ark, the name of Hashem is mentioned 18 times. So each blessing of the Amida corresponds to each time the name of Hashem is mentioned. That's the value. That means when David said that Mizmor, that encompassed the totality of every conceivable need, God's involvement in existence. So the Amida corresponds to that. Another opinion is that there are 18 vertebrae in the spinal column, and when the whole concept of Amida is submission. Why could a person bend? You can only bend because you have vertebrae. If it would be one straight bone, you couldn't bend. So you only have that flexibility to bend is only because you have vertebrae. So the whole 18 represents total submission. That's what it's everything. These are superficial nuances, but they're not superficial because everything has a representation. We say 18 is chai. 18 is chai, life. It's more than life. It's not life because it happens to be numerically life. There's something in 18 which, if you understand all the various levels, you understand why that's life. The Amida is synonymous, which allows us to continue to live and to have bracha and to ward off everything negative if you pray properly and you have the worthiness. But you need prophets for that. Without the prophets, it's the same thing. The word innately has that, contains it with it. The paraduma, we have, King Solomon said, I can't fathom it. You say a word in the Torah, we study. A little child, he says a verse in the Chumash. He has no understanding. His level of understanding is so superficial. He's just saying the words. But saying those words, what do those words represent? Those words are connected to every aspect of existence. And because the child, as the Talmud says, his words, his vapor is pure, because he's not held liable or accountable for anything. So what comes out of his mouth is the purest of pure. Therefore, what does that activate? The Talmud tells us that the world stands on heaven and Chinuch. The vapor of these children's mouths, the world stands on that. That's how pure it is. Well, why should it stand on it? The child doesn't even understand what he's talking about. It doesn't make a difference. Because the word innately contains within it whatever that is. So all these systems, so could you understand what the Torah is? The Vilna Gaon studied that, said that verse. The 5-year-old child who's just beginning to read, he says that same verse. The Rambam said that verse. Hillel said that verse. Moshe Rabbeinu said that verse. They all said the same verse. And each of them is fulfilling the mitzvah of study of Torah. You're telling me Moshe Rabbeinu's understanding of that verse, that same word, was infinitely greater than us. Forget, we didn't have to talk about the child. But yet, when you say that verse based on your capacity, you activate things and bring about forces which are not fathomable what those forces are. And even to Moshe, whatever he understood, within the extent of the full understanding, only God fully understands what that is. Because the understanding is unlimited. Unlimited. Relative to what we understand to Moshe, he's unlimited to us. But in the reality, the only one who's unlimited is God himself because he's infinite. Moshe is great as well, he's still finite. He's a human being. An angel's finite. But that's exactly what we're talking about over here. To understand all aspects of existence, to maintain 8.5 billion people, and continuously evaluate the nuances and the intention, everything. It's not It's interesting. We say the 13 principal tenets of Jewish belief, they go in a certain order. Before we say that there's such a thing as reward and punishment. Before that, what is the principle? What is the tenet? We believe that God knows man's actions and thoughts. He knows our actions and our thoughts. And then the next one is we speak about reward and punishment. Why did the tenet of knowing our thoughts and actions precede the tenet of reward and punishment? If God doesn't know our actions, so maybe he's giving us more than we deserve. Maybe he's under-rewarding us. We deserve more. The answer is there's nothing that God doesn't know. But what about the quality of the action? What is it infused with? When we speak about lishma, was done with love, was done with reverence. You see the action. Could you really understand the innate quality of the action? God knows your thoughts and he knows your actions. So he knows exactly what was infused in that action. Now we can talk about reward and punishment. Now we speak about the coming of Mashiach. When is the time that the world is going to reach its level? It's time for him to come. That the world has reached sufficient amount of perfection. Now there's no longer free choice. Only God knows that. And that's the coming of Mashiach. And then there's resurrection, which is the ultimate, which is a recreation of new existence. Man is resurrected. And ultimately, he becomes eternal based on his record when he was alive. All this is Rechokim Mimeni. King Solomon, as wise as he was, we can't even fathom what his wisdom was. Chazal tell us based on the verse, the verse says in prophets, his wisdom was kechol hayom. It's like the sand on the beaches. Could you calculate how much sand there are on the beaches? What does it mean? It means the Jewish people can compare to chol hayom. Shem said to Avram, your project will be like chol hayom. He says, if you take all the Jews with all their wisdom of all the millennia, put them on one side of the scale, King Solomon on the other side of the scale, his wisdom outweighs theirs. Could you imagine take 1 billion Einsteins, put them on one side of the scale, put Shlomo HaMelech on the other side, he outweighs them. And this is beyond that, beyond. Could we fathom King Solomon's wisdoms? We can't fathom it. And even he said, Rechokim Mimeni, it's beyond me. Only God himself understands this. So the systems and the paradum, which all it is identically the same reason. Because every system is directly connected to accommodate, it's the blueprint, which is Torah. The paraduma, it only is a result of because the Torah, the metamorphosis which took place at Sinai was only as a result of the Torah. It's one and the same. Rechokim Mimeni, it's beyond me.